I never thought my own blood would try to put me in the ground. If you'd told me a year ago that my grandson would save my life with a sentence he wasn't supposed to be able to speak, I would have called you crazy. But here I am, 68 years old, sitting on my back porch in Savannah, watching the Spanish moss sway in the oak trees, alive because a 9-year-old boy decided the truth was worth more than his own safety. My name is Frank Sullivan. I spent 34 years as a general contractor in coastal Georgia, building homes from Savannah to Hilton Head before my knees gave out and I hung up my tool belt. My wife, Carolyn, passed 3 years ago from complications after a stroke. Since then, it's been just me in this old colonial revival we bought in 1992, the one with the wraparound porch and the magnolia tree she planted the year our son was born. Our son, Craig. That's where this story gets ugly. Craig is 41. He married a woman named Vanessa 8 years ago, a real estate agent from Jacksonville with a smile that could sell anything and eyes that never quite warmed up. Not to me, anyway. They live in a townhouse in Pooler, about 20 minutes west of Savannah, with my grandson Eli, who just turned 9. Eli hasn't spoken since he was 3 years old. The doctors went through every diagnosis in the book: autism spectrum, severe social anxiety, selective mutism, possible brain damage from a fall he took as a toddler. They ran MRIs, hearing tests, developmental assessments. Nothing conclusive. Eli just didn't talk. He communicated through a tablet app that turned typed words into a robotic voice, through nods and head shakes, through those deep brown eyes that always seemed to be studying you, like he was filing away every detail for later. I loved that boy. I loved him more than I loved most things in my life after Carolyn died. Every other Sunday, Craig would bring him over for lunch, and Eli and I would sit on the back porch and watch the boats on the river. He'd lean against my shoulder and point at things: a pelican diving, a shrimp trawler, a dog running along the bank, and I'd tell him what I saw. He never responded with words, but he responded. There was somebody home behind those quiet eyes. I always knew that. Last October, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Craig, and he sounded like a man standing at the edge of something. "Dad, I need help. Big favor." I was already reaching for my coffee. "What's going on?" "Vanessa's brother got into a car wreck in Tallahassee. It's bad. She needs to get down there today, and I need to go with her because he's got no one else. But we can't take Eli. His therapist says any disruption to his routine could set him back months. The respite worker we use is out of town, and his after-school program doesn't run on weekends. Could you take him for a few days? Maybe a week?" "Of course. Bring him on over." "Dad, he's a handful. You know how he gets. The routines, the food preferences, the medication for his anxiety." "Craig, he's my grandson. I raised you, didn't I? I think I can manage a 9-year-old for a week." He showed up 2 hours later, with Eli in the back seat, and enough supplies to outfit a small expedition. There were bins of specific foods Eli would eat: his weighted blanket, his noise-canceling headphones, the tablet, 3 bottles of vitamins and anxiety medication, and a laminated sheet of daily routines taped to the inside of a folder. Eli climbed out of the car, holding a stuffed manatee that had seen better days. He looked up at me, no smile, no wave, just that steady observation. I knelt down and held out my hand. "Good to see you, buddy. We're gonna have a good time." He touched my palm briefly, then walked inside like he already knew where everything was. Vanessa didn't come. Craig said she'd gone ahead to Tallahassee early that morning. He rushed through instructions, kissing Eli on the forehead before heading out. "Remember, Dad, his anxiety meds are the blue capsules, twice a day with food. And make sure he has the tablet charged. That's his lifeline." I watched Craig's truck disappear down the live oak tunnel of my street, then turned to find Eli standing in the hallway, clutching that manatee, staring at the framed photo of Carolyn on the wall. "That's your grandma," I said. "She would have loved having you here." He looked at me, then back at the photo, and something moved across his face. Not quite sadness, not quite recognition. Something older than a 9-year-old should carry. The first 2 days were quiet in every sense of the word. Eli kept to his routines with mechanical precision. He woke at 7, ate the specific cereal he liked, spent mornings on his tablet, ate lunch at noon exactly, watched nature shows about the ocean in the afternoon, and was in bed by 8:30. He barely acknowledged my presence, but he didn't resist it either. We existed in the same space like 2 people sharing a waiting room. I called Craig each evening. He said Vanessa's brother was in bad shape, surgery after surgery, and they'd need at least another week. I told him we were fine. On the third night, I wasn't feeling right. I'd been dealing with heart trouble for 2 years, atrial fibrillation, the kind where your heart decides to tap dance instead of keeping a steady beat. My cardiologist had me on a blood thinner and a rhythm control medication, little round white pills I took every evening with dinner. Without them, my heart could throw a clot. Without them, I could stroke out, or worse. I'd set up my pill organizer the previous Sunday, same as always. 7 days, 7 compartments, each loaded with the right pills. I popped open Wednesday's slot, tossed back the white tablets with a glass of sweet tea, and sat down across from Eli at the dinner table. He was eating macaroni, the only pasta he'd touch, and watching me, not casually, watching me the way a deer watches a noise in the brush. "You okay, Eli?" He didn't respond. He pushed his plate back, pulled his tablet close, and typed something. Then he deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. His fingers were shaking. "Take your time, buddy. What is it?" He stared at the tablet for a long time. Then he set it aside, reached across the table for the notepad I kept by the phone, and wrote in handwriting so precise it looked like a teacher's. "Stop taking your white pills. They're not real." I read it twice. I read it 3 times. I looked at Eli, at this child who hadn't produced a voluntary sentence in 6 years, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean they're not real?" He took the notepad back and wrote faster. "Dad came to your house 4 weeks ago when you were in the yard. He went in the bathroom. He switched the pills in your box. I watched from the hallway. Mom told him to do it." My hands went still on the table. Craig had been over 4 weeks ago, a Saturday afternoon. He'd brought pulled pork from that place off Victory Drive. I'd gone out to trim the crepe myrtle that was brushing against the gutter, left him inside for maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. "Eli, how do you know this? You weren't here that day." He wrote again, and this time his hand was so tight on the pen that the paper nearly tore. "I was in the car. Dad brought me but told me to stay. I got out and came inside through the back. I saw him in the bathroom with your pill box. Then he did something that made every hair on my body stand up straight. He spoke, Grandpa. His voice was barely a sound, like a door creaking open after years of rust. Please, believe me, I sat there. I sat there and I felt the world reorganize itself around those 2 words. Eli was speaking. Eli, who hadn't spoken since he was 3, was looking me dead in the eyes and speaking. "You can talk," I said. It wasn't a question. I've always been able to talk. His voice was rough, halting, like an engine that hadn't turned over in years. I just wasn't allowed to. "What do you mean you weren't allowed?" "Mom told me when I was little. She said if I ever talked, if I ever told anyone what I heard or saw, she'd put me in a hospital for kids who are crazy. She said they'd strap me to a bed, and I'd never come home. She told me every week. Every single week she reminded me. The room got very small. I could hear my own heartbeat, which was probably beating wrong because of whatever was in those pills, and I could hear the cicadas outside, and I could hear this boy, this silent boy, speaking for the first time in 6 years because he'd decided my life was worth more than his fear. Why are they doing this? I asked, though part of me already knew. Money. The word came out flat, like he'd heard it so many times it lost all meaning. They owe a lot of money. Mom gambles. Online, on her phone, at a place in Jacksonville she drives to on weekends when Dad thinks she's showing houses. They're in trouble. I hear them fighting about it at night through the wall. Dad said you have a big life insurance policy, and the house is worth a lot. Mom said if something happened to you, if your heart gave out, it would look normal because you already have heart problems. I stood up so fast the chair hit the wall behind me. Eli flinched, and I immediately softened. I'm not angry at you, not even a little. You just did the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Are you going to die? He asked. Not tonight, I'm not. I went straight to the bathroom. I pulled the pill organizer out of the medicine cabinet and dumped Thursday through Sunday into my palm. The pills looked right. Same shape, same size, same white coating, but Eli was right about one thing. I'd been feeling off for weeks, dizzy, short of breath, my heart racing at odd times then slowing to a crawl. I'd blamed it on grief, on age, on the heat. I hadn't blamed it on my son because what kind of man blames his own son for trying to kill him? I called 911. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. I explained the situation to a young EMT named Davis who looked like he couldn't decide whether to believe me or call a psychiatrist. Then he took my vitals. Sir, your heart rate is 42 beats per minute. Your blood pressure is 78/50. We need to transport you now. I grabbed Eli, who was already standing by the door with his manatee and his shoes on, like he'd been preparing for this moment. We rode to Memorial Health in the back of the ambulance, and Eli held my hand the entire way. At the hospital, a cardiologist named Dr. Reeves examined me while a nurse took the pills I'd brought. Eli sat in the corner of the room, not on his tablet, not distracted, just watching everything. Mr. Sullivan, Doctor, Reeves said after reviewing the initial tests, your rhythm is severely depressed. If you've been taking your prescribed medication, this shouldn't be happening. Something is interfering with your cardiac function. It's the pills, Eli said from the corner. Dr. Reeves turned and looked at him. Every adult in the room turned and looked at him. I told the intake nurse he was nonverbal. They're not his real medicine, Eli continued, his voice gaining strength. My dad switched them 4 weeks ago. My mom told him to. Dr. Reeves looked at me. I nodded. Test the pills. Please. They sent the tablets to the hospital lab. The preliminary results came back in 2 hours. The pills contained a concentrated dose of a beta blocker, not the rhythm control medication I was prescribed, combined with something that was suppressing my heart rate to dangerous levels. Doctor, Reeves said if I'd continued taking them for another 10 days to 2 weeks, my heart would have simply stopped. It would have looked like sudden cardiac death, natural causes, an old man with a bad heart who finally ran out of luck. Someone who knew your medical history designed this specifically for you, Dr. Reeves said, and his voice had lost all its clinical detachment. This was deliberate. The police came. A detective named Hardin, a tall black man with reading glasses and a quiet intensity that reminded me of Carolyn's father. He listened to Eli's full account without interrupting. When Eli finished, Hardin looked at me. Your grandson's been carrying this for a while. 6 years of silence, I said, because his mother told him he'd be locked up if he ever spoke. Hardin's jaw tightened. He excused himself to make calls. I lay in the hospital bed that night, hooked up to a cardiac monitor. Eli asleep in the chair beside me, with a hospital blanket pulled up to his chin, and I thought about every visit Craig and Vanessa had made over the past year. Every Sunday lunch, every birthday dinner, every casual stop by. Had they been watching me, checking if I looked weaker? Had Vanessa smiled at me over Thanksgiving turkey knowing her husband had loaded my pill box with poison? Craig and Vanessa were in Tallahassee, supposedly at a hospital. The police checked. There was no brother. There was no car wreck. Vanessa's brother lived in San Diego and was perfectly fine. The entire emergency had been fabricated to get Eli into my care at the exact time I'd be taking the swapped medication. They'd planned to be out of state when my heart gave out. They'd planned to drive back for the funeral, hold Eli's hand at the graveside, and collect the insurance money and the house within months. They were arrested at a motel off I-10 outside Tallahassee. Not at a hospital. At a motel with a casino shuttle brochure on the nightstand and over $6,000 in gambling receipts in Vanessa's purse. Craig broke first. He always was soft when pressure came. He told the detectives everything. How Vanessa's gambling had spiraled, how they'd maxed out credit cards, taken predatory loans, borrowed from people you don't borrow from, how Vanessa had found out about my life insurance policy, $750,000, and the equity in the house, and had started planning. How she'd researched medications online, figured out which drugs could mimic cardiac failure in a man with my specific condition. How Craig had driven to Savannah alone that Saturday with Eli in the car, told me he was just stopping by, and walked into my bathroom while I trimmed the crepe myrtle. He said he cried afterward. He said he almost called to warn me twice. He said he loved me. I don't know what love means to Craig anymore. Vanessa said nothing. Her lawyer said nothing. She sat in interrogation with her arms crossed and her face blank, the same face she'd worn at every family dinner for 8 years. They were both charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. The child abuse charges came separately, after the district attorney's office reviewed Eli's testimony about 6 years of psychological threats. Eli had to give a formal statement. A child advocate sat with him, and a forensic interviewer asked the questions. He described, in that still rough voice, how his mother had first told him to stop talking when he was 3. How she'd said children who talk about grown-up things get taken away to dark rooms. How she'd repeat it every week, sometimes whispering it at bedtime, sometimes hissing it in the car. How he'd learned to suppress every sound, every word, every reaction, until the silence became a kind of armor. I could hear everything, he told the interviewer. I just couldn't say anything. The interviewer asked why he finally spoke. Because Grandpa was going to die. And he's the only person who ever sat with me without wanting something. I watched that interview through a one-way mirror, and I'm not ashamed to say I wept. The weeks after were chaos and quiet in equal measure. The court granted me emergency custody of Eli. We went back to the house in Savannah, and I changed every lock, installed cameras, and had my actual cardiologist put me on the right medication under close supervision. The damage from 4 weeks of wrong pills wasn't permanent, but it was real. My heart needed time to recover. So did the rest of me. Eli started talking more each day, at first just to me, in short sentences, careful and measured. Then to Dr. Pham, the child psychologist assigned to his case. Then, gradually, to other people. His voice changed as he used it, growing from a whisper to something solid. He asked 1,000 questions. About how engines work, about why the ocean is salty, about Carolyn, about what prison is like. He wanted to know everything he'd been unable to ask for 6 years, and I answered every single question as honestly as I could. One evening in December, we were sitting on the porch watching the sun drop behind the river. Eli had a library book about manatees open on his lap, because of course he did. Grandpa? Yeah, buddy. Did you believe me right away, when I told you about the pills? I thought about it. Yes, I did. Why? Adults never believe kids about stuff like that. Because you had no reason to lie. And because I could see it in your face. You were terrified. But you said it anyway. That's not what a liar looks like. That's what courage looks like. He was quiet for a minute. Mom said no one would ever believe me. That's why I was so scared. Your mom was wrong about a lot of things. Yeah. He turned a page in his book. She was. The trial came in March. Craig pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 15 years. He read a statement in court about regret and desperation and love, and I sat in the back row and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not satisfaction. Just a hollow space where my son used to be. Vanessa went to trial. She pleaded not guilty, claimed Craig acted alone, said she never threatened Eli. Her attorney tried to argue that Eli's testimony was unreliable, that a child who'd been silent for 6 years couldn't be trusted as a witness. The jury didn't buy it. The text messages between Craig and Vanessa sealed it. Make sure the kid doesn't catch on. She'd written 3 days before they dropped Eli at my house. If he figures it out, we handle it later. The prosecutor asked the jury to consider what handle it later meant when applied to a 9-year-old boy. She was convicted on all counts. 22 years? No parole for 18. Eli didn't attend either sentencing. He was at school. A small private academy outside Savannah that specialized in kids who'd been through trauma. His teacher, Miss Dawkins, called me after his first week. Mr. Sullivan, I want you to know that Eli read his personal essay aloud in front of the class today. The assignment was, someone who changed my life. He wrote about you. About me? About how you always talked to him even when he couldn't talk back? About how you never treated him like he was broken? He said, my grandpa talked to me like I was a person, not a problem. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, mine included. That night, I sat on the porch alone while Eli did homework upstairs, and I talked to Carolyn the way I sometimes do when the house gets too quiet. He's going to be all right, I told her. Our grandson is going to be all right. Eli thrived. That's the word his psychologist used, and it's the right one. Within 6 months, he was reading 2 grade levels above his age. He joined a junior marine biology program at the Tybee Island Marine Science Center and came home every Saturday smelling like salt water and talking nonstop about sea turtles and tidal ecosystems. He made friends, a boy named Jackson and a girl named Priya, and they'd ride bikes through Forsyth Park while I sat on a bench pretending to read the newspaper, but really just watching him be a kid. He still had hard days. Nightmares sometimes, where he'd wake up gasping and I'd find him sitting rigid in bed, that manatee clutched to his chest. Days where the old silence crept back, and he'd go hours without speaking. Not because he couldn't, but because the habit was so deep, it pulled him under without warning. Dr. Pham said that was normal, that healing isn't linear, that 6 years of enforced silence leaves marks you can't see. But the good days outnumbered the bad ones, and the good days kept getting better. Craig writes letters from prison. They come every couple months, addressed to both of us. I open them, read them, and leave them on the kitchen table for Eli to decide. He read the first one and put it in a shoebox in his closet. He hasn't read any since. Maybe when I'm older, he said once. Maybe when I understand why people do things like that. Right now, I just want to be a kid. I told him that was the smartest thing I'd ever heard. Vanessa doesn't write. Her mother called once. Left a voicemail asking me to consider both sides. I deleted it. There aren't two sides to poisoning an old man and terrorizing a child into silence for 6 years. Last month, Eli came home from the marine biology program holding a certificate. He'd given a presentation about manatee conservation to a group that included a professor from the University of Georgia. The professor told him he had a future in marine science. Eli put the certificate on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a dolphin. Then he looked at me with a grin that lit up his whole face. "Grandpa, I think I want to be a marine biologist. I think you'd be a great one. Can I get a fish tank? A big one. For my room." "How big?" "Like, really big." "We'll see." He grinned wider. We both knew "we'll see" meant yes. The final custody hearing was last week. Standing in front of a family court judge, I formally adopted Eli. He's legally my son now, not just my grandson. He chose to keep the Sullivan name. When the judge signed the papers, Eli squeezed my hand so tight I thought he'd break something. Outside the courthouse, standing in that thick Savannah heat with the cicadas screaming in the oaks, he looked up at me. "Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For not giving up. For being here. Eli, you saved my life. All I did was answer the phone. You did more than that. You listened. That's the part that matters." He's right. That is the part that matters. I'm 68 now. My heart is stable, monitored closely, medicated properly this time. My cardiologist says if I keep taking care of myself, I've got plenty of good years left. I intend to use every one of them, making sure Eli never has to be silent again. He's upstairs right now. I can hear him talking to Jackson on some video call, arguing about whether a great white shark could beat an orca in a fight. Eli says the orca wins every time. He's been making his case for 10 minutes straight and shows no signs of stopping. 6 years of silence. 6 years of watching and waiting and swallowing every word because the person who was supposed to protect him told him his voice was dangerous. And now he won't shut up. I wouldn't have it any other way. There's something I think about late at night when the house is quiet and the river is just a dark ribbon beyond the trees. I think about how close it came. Another week, maybe 2, and my heart would have given out at the dinner table or in my sleep or on that porch where I used to sit with Carolyn. They would have called it natural causes. Craig would have stood at my funeral and shaken hands and said all the right things. Vanessa would have worn black and dabbed her eyes and started calling real estate agents before the flowers wilted. And Eli would have been trapped. Trapped with the people who killed his grandfather. Trapped in silence. Trapped in a life where the only person who ever treated him like a whole human being was gone. That's what keeps me up. Not what they tried to do to me. What they would have done to him. But he spoke. A 9-year-old boy who'd been told his voice was a weapon that would destroy him. Who'd been conditioned to believe that silence was the only thing keeping him safe, looked at me across a dinner table and made a choice. He chose my life over his fear. He chose truth over safety. He chose to trust that his grandfather would believe him when every adult in his life had failed him. I don't know what I did to deserve that, but I know what I owe him for it. Everything. I owe him everything. So here we are. A retired contractor and a 10-year-old marine biologist living in an old house in Savannah, with a fish tank that's probably too big for the room and a stuffed manatee that's held together with hope and duct tape. We cook dinner together every night. We walk the riverfront on weekends. We talk. God, do we talk. About animals and history and school and the future, and what kind of dog we should get when the fish tank novelty wears off. He asked me last week if I thought he'd turned out okay, considering everything. I told him he turned out better than okay. I told him he turned out brave. He said, "I wasn't brave, Grandpa. I was just tired of being quiet." Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe bravery isn't the absence of fear. Maybe it's just the moment when staying silent becomes more dangerous than speaking up. Eli found that moment, and because he did, we're both still here. Tonight, the porch light is on, the river is catching the last of the sunset, and somewhere upstairs my boy is telling his friend that an orca's bite force is strong enough to crush a great white skull. He's free now. Free to talk, free to argue, free to be loud and wrong and passionate and everything a kid is supposed to be. Free to be himself without fear. That's the ending we earned. Not the one they planned for us, but the one we built together, word by word, out of 6 years of silence and one sentence that changed everything.